Andrew is, I'm saying give him 50% less than what we've been giving him. That's going to hit your pocketbook really hard there. So, okay, so how is everybody tonight? Just doing peachy, everybody? Okay, anybody have some good news to share with us tonight? I know the Crows do, that their son, Matthew, is home and he's doing better after his surgery, and so they're very thankful for that. Still in discomfort, still having to recover and come back from his surgery, but he's doing better, and they wanted you to know that. So, anything else? Okay, nothing else, huh? Just to give you some other news, Nellie Dassall is still awaiting some good results so she can have her surgery, and they're waiting for things to get in line with her first of all. Mike Reed is in recovery or recuperating out of post-op. He's had his surgery today and hoping to be on the mend soon. And then some sad news. Brother Alfred D'Ambrosio passed away this morning. That's Mary Grace's brother, if you don't know who that is. And he had been taken to the hospital, and then they had placed him into ICU to do some just monitoring and evaluation. And this morning he ate some, drank some. The nurse was there with him, thought everything was fine, and then she went back down, to, I guess, the nurse's station, and then just shortly thereafter, his heart rate started dropping considerably. They worked with him for about a half an hour on CPR, but was not able to bring him back. So be sure to keep Mary Grace and Jim in your thoughts and prayers, if you would. So, anything else tonight? Yes, sir. Yeah. And what's her name, Brian? Wendy Quinn. Okay. What's that? Oh, that's okay. So it must be Tom's niece. Sister. That's what. Yeah, sister-in-law. Tom. Okay. Wendy Quinn. Let me write that down so I don't forget. Anything else tonight? That's right. Enjoying an eternity for all the good and better things. That's right. Also, be sure to remember. I know, and I didn't mention this, but Lucy Richardson's. You mentioning about your sister, but Lucy Richardson has. They found stage 3 cancer in her bladder, and they're working with that rather aggressively. So if you'll keep her in your thoughts and prayers too. Okay, let's bow. Oh, yes. Oh, yes, ma'am. Okay. Yeah, I saw that on, was that sent out today? Seemed like it was. Okay. I'm hearing whispering. I'm not sure what that means. Are you talking about the teacher? Anything else? Okay, now we're going to pray. Our Father, thank you so very much. You are a God who cares, and we know that. You are a God who just this past Sunday, from the comments that Jack Clark made and Steve Hill made, we know that we feel and understand and experience your answers to our prayers. And we are thankful for the good news that Steve was able to report to us, and just the love that Jack was able to feel and express himself for the care that's been given to him. Lord, we're asking you to be with Mary Grace and Jim in the passing of Alfred, her brother, and help Mike to recover from his surgery and to do well. We're asking you to be with Nellie Dassall, that she'll be able to get that soon so that she can have her surgery and begin the improvement, and to be with Wendy Quinn, Brian's sister, with this cancer that she's experiencing, and Lori List with all that she's obviously pain and difficulties that she's going through from this accident. Lord, thank you for the good news with Matthew, and we're just asking you to continue to help him recover and do well. And as we open your word tonight, we're asking for your guidance and your direction in our class and in our very thoughts. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so this evening we're going to start out, we're going to talk about the wise and the foolish builder. So let's look at Luke's account, chapter 6. We'll look at Luke chapter 6, verses 47 through 49. Luke chapter, well, I'm in chapter 7. That won't help me much. Really beginning of verse 46, yeah. Now to him who calls me Lord, Lord, now why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I say? Everyone who comes to me and hears my words and acts on them, I will show you whom he is like. He's like a man building a house who dug deep and laid a foundation on the rock. And when there was a flood, the river burst against that house, and yet it could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who heard and has not acted accordingly is like a man who built his house on the ground without a foundation, and the river burst against it, and immediately it collapsed, and the ruin of that house was great. Well, we don't have to imagine this at all, right? I mean, we've just witnessed this. I mean, it's been put all over the news for us. We were blessed here, fortunate that the storms didn't do the devastation here. But I mean, we've seen what the floods can do, what the storms can do. The river that rises 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever feet goes and begins to wreak havoc on people's homes and their lives as a result of that. So we understand it, right? I mean, this is not out of the question. It's not something that's bizarre that we got to try to figure out. Everybody gets the illustration itself, right? Okay. Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. I mean, we understand when the rains fall and the waters go up. Okay, all right. So anyway, so let's look at this. So we talked about the context rules. That's always, the rule of context is context rules. So right before this parable is the Sermon on the Mount. And the Sermon on the Mount, the part of the sermon that is immediately before the parable, is where Jesus, if we go to Matthew's account, in Matthew chapter 7, immediately before this parable, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Many will say unto me in that day, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name, and in your name cast out demons, and in your name perform many miracles? And then I will declare to them, I never knew you. Leave me, you who practice lawlessness. Now that's what's Matthew's account. That's stated immediately before the parable. After the parable, the biggest indicator of this parable and what it's illustrating is found in the introductory words of the parable itself. Okay? If we look at what the parable says, therefore, whoever hears these words of mine and acts on them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not act upon them will be like a foolish man. So that's pretty clear, right? I mean, that's as good as an explanation as far as like the parable of the sower, when Jesus gives us the parable and then He explains what the parable's about. This one he tells us right at the onset, okay, I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to give you an illustration. A wise man is somebody who acts this way. A foolish man is somebody who acts this other way. So what is the parable illustrating? You are a wise man to figure that out, Jenny. Okay. Really, it's the idea of the eventual fate of those who accept or reject the teachings of Jesus. Okay? I mean, that's really what's at stake here. The wise man accepts the teaching of Jesus, and what does he do? Builds his house on the rock. Okay? We could all do the song. Well, you couldn't all. Some of you could do the song. Okay? The wise man built his house on the rock. Foolish man did what? Built his house on the sand. Okay, you guys are good. Okay, so, but I mean, it's the eventual fate of what we do or don't do with the Word of God. That's really what he's illustrating here. A wise man does this, a foolish man does this. So it's not very difficult, not difficult at all, in fact, to understand this parable. Anybody have a question? I've just told you can't because it's very easy to understand. Okay, good. All right, so let's look at this next parable, okay? The king's son in Matthew chapter 22. Matthew chapter 22. And if you guys don't say anything tonight, we'll be done in about 7 more minutes. Matthew chapter 22, beginning of verse 1. I could read real slow, if that will help. Jesus spoke to them again in parables, saying, "The kingdom of heaven is like a king who held a wedding feast for his son. And he sent out his slaves to call those who had been invited to the wedding feast, and they were unwilling to come." Verse 4. Again, he sent other slaves, saying, "Tell those who have been invited, behold, I prepared my dinner, my oxen and my fattened calf are all butchered, and everything is ready. Come to the wedding feast." But they paid no attention, and they went their separate ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his slaves and treated them abusively, and then killed them. Now the king was angry, and he sent his armies and destroyed those murderers and set their city on fire. Then he said to his slaves, "The wedding feast is ready, but those who were invited are not worthy. So go to the main roads and invite whomever you find there to the wedding feast." Those slaves went out into the streets and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with dinner guests. So we could put in today's children's story, what? And they all lived happily ever after. Okay, I mean, the wedding feast, okay, good, they had the wedding. But, it says at verse 11, when the king came in to look over the dinner guests, he saw a man who was not dressed in wedding clothes, and he said unto him, "Friend, how did you get in here without wedding clothes?" And the man was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, "Tie his hands and his feet and throw him into outer darkness, and there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth in that place, for many are called, but few are chosen." Okay, so that's just as easy as the last one, right? No, there's some more challenge, a little bit more difficulty in this, okay? So if we're going to first of all start out with the understanding of context. So the rule of context is context rules. So where does the parable fit in all of this? Well, if we go back earlier in the chapter 21, verses 1 through 11, the Lord has just triumphantly entered into the city of Jerusalem. He comes riding in. That's the beginning of chapter 21. And then in chapter 21, verses 12 through 17, he goes to the temple, and he sees the money changers who are there at the temple. He sees them abusing the household of God, and he's irate over that. He turns over tables. He puts together a whip and drives people out of there. That's not normally the picture we have of Jesus, of a whip and driving people out, but that's exactly what he does in that situation. Then his authority is questioned as to who gave you this right to do this? Who do you think you are? Which would be very natural, right? I mean, this was business as usual in the temple area, and Jesus goes in and is turning over tables and driving people away, and that was the question. Who do you think you are, really? Who gave you this authority? Where did you get this power or this authority to do the things you're doing? So Jesus tells them two parables. He tells them the parable of the rebellious son, of the two sons and of the rebellious tenants. And then the Pharisees perceive that Jesus is talking about them in these parables. They come to this conclusion, and so they determine to take him by force and kill Jesus, but they're afraid of the crowds, so they don't do that. Then we have the parable. And then it says in chapter 22 of the book of Matthew, verses 15 and forward, then the Pharisees went and plotted together how they might trap him in what he said, and they sent their disciples to him along with the Herodians, and they're just, again, trying to trap Jesus, get him into a fix where he can't get himself out of. Now, why are they doing that, first of all? Why are they trying to entrap Jesus in what he says? Okay, it's a threat to their way of life. He was going to upset everything, as obvious when he went into the temple, turning over tables and doing all of that. I mean, who are you? Okay, and who let you come in and do this? It'd be like somebody interrupting during Bible class tonight and making some big, whoa, what's going on here? And that's kind of how they responded. Okay, this is at the temple, remember, where this all happens. So it's going to upset their way of life. What else are they? Why else would they do this? Okay, yeah, so that you don't have any authority. You can't tell me what to do. We're okay. I'm okay, you're okay, just leave me alone, kind of, in that sense. And they were afraid of him. They were just afraid of Jesus, of what he stood for, what he meant, what he was doing. And so everything about Jesus was threatening to them, so we've got to get rid of this guy. And only way we're going to be able to do it is if we can trap him in something that he says, because then, well, we got him now. Okay, we can take him before the authorities. We can do whatever we want to. Okay, so there is this ability that has within them. That's what they're desiring to do. Okay, so now let's go back to the parable. Okay, so Jesus tells the parable, and let's make sure we understand what's happening. Okay, the king's son is getting ready to get married. So what does the king do? He has a huge celebration, a big feast, okay? Oxen, other animals are slaughtered, butchered. I mean, we've got this huge feast that would be fitting for who? A king's son, okay? The prince is getting married. And so this is a huge event. So he sends out the invitations, and how are they received? Yeah, they're just ridiculed, they're rebuffed, they're turned away, ignored, some of them. And then some of them actually decide, well, we're going to take these inviters, I guess, and we're going to abuse them and even kill some of them. So what's the king's reaction to that? Anger. Yeah, I mean, he's furious over this, okay? So he's furious, and he decides to punish those men who did that, as well as what? Burn their city. I mean, he's not just kind of a little irritated, okay? It's not like, well, okay, but I didn't like it. I mean, he's furious over this. It's the story. He's going to punish them. But what's the problem with doing all of that and the wedding? The hall's still empty, right? There's no guests. And so he sends his servants out again and says, now you go out to the main roads and bring in anybody that you can so you can fill the hall. So do they? Yes, they fill the hall. Okay, so if we stopped there, what's happening? What's it illustrating for us if we stop there? Which he doesn't, by the way. But if the Lord stopped the story right there, what would that illustrate? Okay, he'll take anybody, or if you refuse him, he'll find others. Okay, but yeah, it's open to anyone. It's not just the high crust of society, the upper crust, the really good and wealthy that the king might have invited first. but it's anyone. Go to the highways, go to the main roads, find them, bring people in here so that the hall is filled and I'm not embarrassed and my son's not embarrassed. This is a wedding feast, a celebration, okay? But it doesn't end there, because it goes on to say that now the king comes into the hall and he's looking around at all of these lovely guests that he has, and one guy stands out in the crowd, and it says, what about him? Yeah, he's not dressed properly, not dressed in wedding clothes is how the New American Standard puts it, but he's not properly attired for a wedding. And so what does the king do? Approaches him, questions him about it, and what's his response? Well, he doesn't have anything to say for himself. He is speechless over all of this. So the king says, all right, handcuff him, bind him hand and foot, take him outside, throw him into outer darkness. And then he makes this statement, for many are called and few are chosen. Okay, so we got the parable, we understand the story, we see the context of what's going on. So we understand the first part about all the guests that are coming. So who or what is going on? Well, I mean, we're all okay with the first part of it, right? I mean, everybody's pretty much okay. I can understand that. Yep, see that. Yeah, the hall, we're going to fill it up, so he goes and fills it up. But we have a little bit of challenge with the second part of it, this improperly attired person who's at the wedding. So who or what is being represented here in this story? No respect? Okay, that certainly could be. Yeah, that I just come walking in like I look right now, okay, and should have been there. Okay, but I mean, that certainly could be. Jennings? Okay, all right. So that's a good explanation. You said that there's different requirements that are incumbent upon the guest to be at the wedding, so that there would, just like there are certain requirements upon us as far as our faith is concerned. Gary? In what way? Okay, could be. So who is the king in the story? God. Okay, who is the son? Jesus, the son. Okay, what's the wedding? The wedding feast that we are to look forward to, as far as we're part of the bride of Christ, the church. I mean, that certainly could all be involved in it. So again, what about this one guy that's there and he's not dressed right? Drew? Okay. Okay, sure. I mean, you could see that being the case as far as his heart is not right, that being the clothing that he's just not attired as he should be. He looks good, maybe he looks fine on the outside, but he's not really who he ought to be. Yes, sir. Mm-hmm. Right? Okay. Yeah, I think you're on a really a good point here, and I mean it goes along with what Drew was saying too. I mean, you see, it's coupled. The Pharisees are on the beginning and the end of the story, as far as the illustration is concerned. They sandwich it as far as that goes. But I think this very well may be the one in the one who is not properly attired. That there are people in the church who have been baptized even into the church or into Christ, and yet they're not really don't seem to be a part of anything as far as the church is concerned. They did whatever they did one day, and they came forward or they got baptized or whatever the case is, but they're not really somebody who has done what God wanted them to do. So it could be that idea of somebody who's gone through this action, but they've never really repented of their sin. They've never really changed their heart, changed their life to be the person that God wanted them to be. And so the Lord's able to see that. The king can see that. I can't see that. See, I can't look at you and say, oh, well, you've never really repented. Yeah, you were baptized one day, but you never really changed your life. You've never really given yourself to the Lord. But the king could do that. The king could look at it. Go ahead, Drew. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Yeah. And they look to be clothed fine, but they're not clothed in righteousness or whatever you might want to say. Yeah. So from that standpoint, and that's what it seems to be, the illustration, it would seem to me, is that I don't remember how I worded this now, that the variety of men's hearts in hearing and accepting the invitation of God. So you've got some people that the servants went out to, and they ridiculed them, they mocked them, and some they even killed, okay? I mean, does that ever happen today? Yeah, it's happened through history, that you can talk to somebody about the gospel, and there are some people that, they ridicule that, they mock that. There are others, I mean, we're fortunate here in the Western culture that we don't have necessarily the physical violence and persecution that often goes in some other place. It does happen. I'm not saying it doesn't happen here, but it certainly does not happen like it does in some places. That if you share your faith, you're risking your life. Okay? You may lose your life because you share your faith in Christ. And so that very well may be. You offer the invitation, somebody ridicules, somebody mocks, somebody makes fun of it, and somebody else takes you and abuses you, or somebody even takes you and kills you. And there are some people who come in, but they just come in to be a part of something social, if you will. I mean, they find a nice church family, and they come and be a part of that. So let's see if somebody else had another thought. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, that's what Drew was saying. It's open to all. Yeah, Doug? Right. 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 Through baptism. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and that's I've heard that as well about the provision of clothes, but I actually didn't do any more research on it to find if accurate or not. But that's certainly, we certainly can make the argument that God has provided the clothes when he said to clothe yourself in baptism in Galatians chapter 3. So, so that's a good thought. Appreciate that. So somebody else. Yes, sir, Dane. Right. Right. Right.
There is a lot here, but what we really see is those people who are in the races, rather than poor, disabled, blind, it does require an effort. It requires stepping up to the occasion.
Yeah.
And that's something that is really driven here hard, because he was a very demanding person. Whenever he was able to decide, I'm going to punish those who do my service fully, but to the entire community who refused to.
Right.
So I say the entire community who allowed people like that to be among them.
Right.
And so he was a very, very hard person.
Yeah, as far as the story is concerned, I mean, I think that the key to it is, again, the last verse where he says, "For many are called and few are chosen." I mean, that seems to be the bottom line of what the messaging is, or the illustration is. God's called and invited all these people, but it's up to you, right? And it's up to me. It's up to my next door neighbor. It's up to my 3 sons, whoever, to make that choice to do it or not to do it, to accept God's invitation and come to the wedding or not. Steve. Right. 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 Okay. Yeah. And when we teach somebody, the other thing, messaging that we should get from this is if they reject the message, that's not a reflection necessarily. I mean, I may have done a poor job, don't get me wrong, okay? I may have done it poorly. But if they reject the message of Christ or the invitation of Christ, that's not on me. I've tried to do what the King sent me to do, to invite. And so I go out and try to invite somebody to come, and they ridicule, they mock, they abuse, they whatever. I lose my job, whatever it might happen to me. But I've done what the King asked me to do in trying to bring somebody to the wedding feast. And that's how we all should be in that regard. So with that in mind, let's move on to the next, because they're very, very similar, is the Great Supper in Luke chapter 14. In fact, some people say this is a retelling, and it's just the biographer Luke just kind of, he botched it up and got a few of the details wrong. Now, it's another story, okay? But in Luke chapter 14, beginning verse 15. "Now, when one who sat at the table with him heard these things, he said unto him, Blessed is he who shall eat bread in the kingdom of God. Then he said unto him, a certain man gave a great supper and invited many, and sent his servant at supper time to say to those who were invited, come, all things are ready. But they all with one accord began to make excuses. The first said, I've bought a piece of ground and I must go see it. I ask you that I be excused. Another one said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen and I am going to test them. I ask that I be excused. Verse 20, still another one said, I have married a wife and therefore I can't come. 21, so that servant came and reported these things to the master. Then the master of the house, being angry, said to the servant, go out quickly into the streets and the lanes of the city and bring in here the poor and the maimed and the lame and the blind. And the servant said, Master, it is done as you commanded, and there's still room. Then the master said to the servant, go out into the highways and the hedges and compel them to come in, that my house may be filled. For I say unto you that none of those men who were invited shall taste my supper. Okay, now there's a lot of similarity, right, between this and the last one we just read. But there are some differences. What are some key differences you see? It's not a wedding, okay, this time. It's not a king this time, okay. What else? Okay, and it's very specific, yeah, as far, oh, no, hey, I got a wife, I can't go. You know, I've got a field, I bought a field, whatever. So there's some specifics that are different about it. I just point that out to let you know, Jesus could tell 2 stories that were similar, right? I mean, that'd be okay for him to do that. We're going to let him do that, right? I mean, obviously. The Lord could have told 100 stories that were similar, but be still a different situation or a different point that he's trying to make in that. So let's look at the context real quick. So what we know is, about this one, Jesus is at a Pharisee's house and he's eating dinner with him. He's been invited to go eat dinner with him, or lunch. Then they put together in front of Jesus, on his way there, or while he is there, we're not sure, he cures a man, but the problem is, it is the Sabbath day. So Jesus questions the people about the Sabbath, and what to do about the Sabbath, how to, whatever, and they refuse to answer him. They will not answer Jesus' questions again. Then he teaches them on the subject of humility, on showing love to the less fortunate and not expecting to receive in kind, if we look in Luke chapter 14. And then following that, masses begin to follow Jesus, and then Jesus, excuse me, speaking in tongues there for a moment. Jesus begins to teach on the exacting nature of discipleship, okay? You can't be one of my disciples if you don't do this and that and the other as far as the end of it. So, although this is similar, it's not the same as the other one is. There is no punishment of the city, of those who refuse. There's no account of an improperly or unprepared a tired person within there. So it's not just a botched up retelling, as I mentioned. Some critics would suggest that. So what is the parable illustrating? Okay, it's similar, but it's not exactly the same. It seems again to show the variety of men's hearts in hearing and accepting the gospel. And maybe specifically he has in mind the Pharisees and the Sadducees, again, like we said before, because they're addressed in this way. So it seems to show the gospel can be spurned by some, but there will be others who will accept it in an ever-widening circle. Here we are today. I don't know, I can't speak for everybody, but I don't know of anyone who in here is Jewish. You may be. But most all of us are Gentiles. The church has opened up the window and the door to Gentiles. So the gospel can be spurned, but others can be invited and willed in this ever-widening circle, and they're encouraged to come. And it could have specific teaching regarding the rejection or the wholesale rejection of the Jewish people and God accepting the Gentiles. Go to the highways, hedges, find them wherever they are. bring them in, and so on. So that seems to be what's happening, but they're very similar, and I just want to share those with you together tonight as we went through this as far as their accepting or rejecting of the gospel. So let's see if you've got a question or thought or something you wanted to bring up about this tonight. Or we can allow them to get in our way. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I remember when I first began to preach, and we were living in Salem, Oregon at the time. I remember I was working with my father-in-law. Can still remember the guy's name. There was a gospel meeting in the little town of Sweet Home, Oregon. That was about an hour and a half or whatever from Salem, where I was living at the time. And so it was a month or so. I didn't go to the meeting. I was, under whatever reason, didn't go. And so the preacher, that local preacher, came, and he was where I was at one Sunday. And he said, "Oh, yeah, we had a meeting last month. I didn't see you at the meeting." And I said, "Yeah, my wife and I." "Oh," he said, "you married a wife and couldn't go, huh?" And so he threw this verse on me, and I'm like, what's he talking about? So anyway, I wasn't trying to use Melissa as an excuse, but anyway, I just still, every time I read this, I can picture him saying this to me. "Yeah, you married a wife, couldn't go." But he's not supplying excuses for us. These are people who've made excuses. They're on the wrong side. So just so we're clear about it, they're on the wrong side of rejecting God's offer. "No, I got a piece of land. No, I've got this. No, I've got that. I can't do it. I'm not going to." And so they just refuse to accept God's offer. All right, something else. Anything else tonight? Yes, ma'am. Sir, sorry.
I need to apologize for an earlier comments. That's not being conflated. But here, it seems to be the first part of the other one in parallel.
Right.
And I think it does go, I think the first part, those who are invited are the first, but the ones who are later invited are more likely.
Right.
Because they weren't all properly oriented for their kind of after the fact. Although I don't think Jesus or God ever represented that way, but he is who that connect to those who possibly were chosen or better than others.
Right.
So he pulled up with those who aren't necessarily thought of as better or good.
Well, we're not going to punish you for merging those two together like that. But but yeah, I mean, when you look at these, again, I want to try to mention that what we have to do, we have to make sure that whatever understanding we have and come away with, first of all, that it's an illustration. It's not teaching new truth. It's illustrating what Jesus' point is that he's trying to make, that he's making, not trying to make, that he's making. And that most of the parables teach one or two simple things, is what I believe. I think they're just a simple story. Now, we can draw other conclusions from it because they would be true. They would fit into the story. But that's not necessarily the point, I don't think, many times, of the parable. I think, again, to this one in Matthew 22, that many are called, few are chosen. I mean, that kind of seems to be, this is what I'm saying. This is the illustration. Okay, here's the story, and here's some window dressing to let you know about this story, but here's the point, that many are called, few are chosen. But I just want you to remember that when you're reading through these parables again, when you think about them, and we're going to look at one next week specifically, and how it has been described through the years, through the centuries. And it's a very well-known parable of the Good Samaritan, that we'll look at next week with a couple of others as well. But some of the ideas that people have come up with and tried to say that the parable of the Good Samaritan is teaching or talking about, we'll see, I think, hopefully, some of the absurdity of that. So, yeah, Drew. Right.
right? And then he extends this out, this call out to the people in the hedges on the streets. And I think he just as easily could say, he invited the Samaritans, he invited the Greek,
Right.
he invited, choose these other undesirable groups of people who will get protected. And it exhibits this thing.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. I think it's a kind of an interesting little shot across the bow. And like, hey, you are invited. You are the invitee.
Yeah.
You're saying that.
Right. And I mean, they would have thought, who better than invite me exactly of themselves. So, all right. Anything else tonight? Thank you so much for being here. Oh, yes, ma'am. Yes. I can. Would you like me to? I can. I just pushed the button. Oh, okay. All right. There we go. All right. Anything else tonight? Okay. Thank you so much for being here. And